Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, April 19th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 84.2 degrees, with a low of 55.4 degrees. It is a beautiful Easter Sunday, so to those observing, we wish you a joyous and reflective holiday. Today, we are analyzing the volatile situation in the Strait of Hormuz and what key factors you should be watching as the standoff hits a critical juncture. We will also investigate the circumstances surrounding the United States government deciding to refund $166 billion to importers. Along with those deep dives, we have a variety of other stories to cover that you will not want to miss. We have plenty of information to get through on this edition of Alex's News. Stay tuned as we begin. We start this morning with a rapidly deteriorating situation in the Persian Gulf. Iran has officially shut down the Strait of Hormuz to all maritime traffic, and the threat of a wider war is growing by the hour. Ethan covers international security for us and has been tracking this crisis from the start. Ethan, bring us up to speed. What exactly happened overnight?
Grace, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has completely reversed course. Earlier, there'd been some suggestion they might allow ships through in exchange for tolls. But according to NBC Los Angeles and the Associated Press, the IRGC now says the strait stays closed, period, until the United States lifts its own naval blockade of Iranian ports. Keep in mind, roughly 1/5 of the world's oil and 20% of its liquefied natural gas flows through that waterway. So we're now looking at what analysts are calling a dual blockade, with both sides choking off the other's access.
And this turned violent yesterday, on Saturday?
It did. IRGC gunboats opened fire on a tanker in the strait on Saturday, April 18th. Newsday, citing the AP, reported that the vessel and crew were safe, thankfully. But the UK Maritime Trade Operations, known as UKMTO, confirmed that Iranian fast attack craft targeted at least 2 commercial vessels northeast of Oman. The Hindu also reported that India's foreign ministry summoned the Iranian ambassador after 2 Indian-flagged merchant ships were targeted. So this isn't just a US-Iran problem anymore. It's pulling in countries that simply want to move goods through the waterway.
How did we get here? This has been building for weeks now.
It has, and it really traces back to late February. According to reports cited by Just Security and Al Jazeera, the United States and Israel launched what they called Operation Epic Fury on February 28th. Israel referred to it as Operation Roaring Lion. It was a massive campaign involving nearly 900 airstrikes, and it was triggered by the collapse of nuclear negotiations in Geneva. The most pivotal moment was the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, during a precision strike on his residence in Tehran. Iran's closure of the strait was its direct military response to that strike.
So the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports came after all of that?
Exactly. The U.S. initiated its naval blockade of Iranian ports on April 13th, just 6 days ago. The State Department frames it as a legal necessity to restore freedom of navigation. But the nation and other legal observers point out that Iran closed the strait first as a direct response to what they call the decapitation strike against their head of state. So you've got both sides arguing they're reacting to the other's provocation, and that's what makes this so dangerous.
There have been talks, though. Where do negotiations stand right now?
There have been talks, and they're moving, but slowly. The Boston Globe reports that negotiations held in Islamabad showed, quote, wide gaps, end quote, though some progress was made. Iranian parliamentary speaker and chief negotiator Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf said Iran seeks a lasting peace but is hampered by a fundamental distrust of the United States. Pakistan's leadership has actually been serving as a primary mediator in all of this, and they suggest an in-principle agreement to extend the current ceasefire may exist. But the IRGC's Saturday night reclosure of the strait has really cast a shadow over that optimism.
What about the nuclear issue? That seems like the biggest sticking point.
It really is. According to Fox News and The Guardian, the U.S. is demanding a 20-year moratorium on Iranian uranium enrichment and wants all enriched stockpiles removed to the United States. In exchange, Washington would unfreeze approximately $20 billion in Iranian assets. But Iran has new leadership now. Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei assumed power on March 9th, after his father's assassination, and he's called the demand to hand over uranium a non-starter. So you've got a new leader under enormous domestic pressure who simply cannot be seen giving in on the nuclear question.
There's a big summit coming up in just 2 days, right?
There is. A high-stakes summit is scheduled for Tuesday, April 21st, at the State Department in Washington, D.C. President Donald Trump has invited Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Lebanese President Joseph Aoun to attend. Trump told ABC News and said during press encounters that a deal is, quote, very close, end quote. But here's the tension. He's simultaneously threatened to resume bombing Iranian infrastructure if the waterway isn't cleared by the time the current regional ceasefire expires this Wednesday, April 22nd. So diplomacy and military threats are running on parallel tracks right now.
That Wednesday deadline feels incredibly tight. What happens if the summit doesn't produce results?
That's the question everyone's asking. If what people are calling the Washington window fails to produce a breakthrough on both the dual blockade and the nuclear stockpile issue, the regional ceasefire is expected to expire on Wednesday. And that could mean a return to active, large-scale hostilities. We're talking about a situation where both sides have drawn very public lines, and backing down carries enormous political cost for each of them.
What about the legal arguments here? Is the U.S. blockade even legal under international law?
That's a point of intense international contention. According to the Times of Israel and United Nations reports, the U.S. naval blockade is a unilateral action. A mid-March UN resolution did condemn Iran's mining of the strait. But a subsequent resolution on April 7th that would have authorized international force was vetoed by Russia and China. Under the San Remo Manual and UN General Assembly Resolution 3314, a naval blockade is technically classified as an act of war. The Trump administration argues it's exercising belligerent rights to pressure what it calls a nuclear-defiant regime. Meanwhile, Iran's UN ambassador, Saeed Iravani, has formally classified the U.S. actions as maritime robbery and piracy.
So neither side has clear international backing for what they're doing?
That's a fair way to put it. The vetoes by Russia and China blocked any multilateral authorization, so the U.S. is acting on its own legal interpretation. And Iran's closure of the strait, while framed as self-defense, doesn't have broad UN endorsement either. Both sides are essentially operating in a legal gray zone, and that makes it harder for neutral parties to step in and enforce any kind of resolution.
Ethan, the human cost of all this has been enormous. What are we looking at in terms of casualties?
The numbers are staggering, Grace. Combined reporting from NBC Los Angeles, Newsday, and the Boston Globe puts Iran's death toll at least 3,000 people killed over the last 2 months. Lebanon has seen nearly 2,300 killed. Israel has lost 23 civilians and 15 soldiers. 13 U.S. service members have been killed. And on the seas, 12 seafarers have died, with 16 merchant ships damaged and 1 tugboat sunk. Those are real lives behind every one of those numbers.
There's a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah that's been holding. Is that stable?
It's holding for now. It's a 10-day ceasefire, and the Lebanese army has only just begun the grueling task of installing temporary bridges over the Litani River. The original infrastructure was destroyed by Israeli strikes. So even where the fighting has paused, the devastation is so severe that basic movement and aid delivery are a challenge. And of course, if the broader ceasefire expires Wednesday without an agreement, that fragile calm in Lebanon could collapse too.
So all eyes are on Washington Tuesday and that Wednesday deadline.
Absolutely. The next 72 hours are critical. The April 21st summit is really the last clear diplomatic off-ramp before that Wednesday expiration. Pakistan's mediation efforts have kept a thread of dialogue alive, but the IRGC's decision to reclose the strait on Saturday night sent a very aggressive signal. If negotiators can't bridge the gaps on the dual blockade and the uranium question simultaneously, we could be looking at a dramatic escalation by midweek.
Ethan, Thank you for walking us through all of that. We'll be watching this closely.
Thanks, Grace.
Let's move to our second story now, and it's a big one for American businesses. Tomorrow morning, the federal government flips the switch on what's being called the hottest website in America. Chloe's been following this one closely. Chloe, what exactly launches tomorrow?
So tomorrow, Monday, April 20th, at 8 a.m. Eastern, U.S. Customs and Border Protection opens a brand new digital portal. It's officially called the Consolidated Administration and Processing of Entries Portal, or CAPE for short. NPR's Alina Selyukh actually coined that nickname, the hottest website in America, and it's stuck for good reason. This system is essentially a digital ATM designed to return an estimated $166 billion to U.S. importers.
$166 billion. How did the government end up owing that kind of money?
It goes back to early 2025, when President Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEEPA, to impose sweeping reciprocal tariffs on nearly all imports. The administration's argument was that these duties were needed to fight trade deficits and the fentanyl crisis. But as ABC News and CNN both reported, the legal challenge reached the U.S. Supreme Court, and on February 20th of this year, the court ruled 6-3 in Learning Resources versus Trump that the tariffs were unconstitutional. The justices held that the power to tax and set tariffs belongs exclusively to Congress, and IEEPA simply didn't grant the president authority to bypass the legislature for broad, peacetime trade policy.
So that ruling essentially turned all those collected duties into illegal payments?
That's exactly right. Overnight, billions of dollars the government had already collected became money it was legally obligated to return. And here's what makes the pressure even more intense. Experts estimate the U.S. Treasury must pay statutory interest on those held funds. That interest could cost taxpayers an additional $700 million per month in delays, so there's a real financial incentive to move fast.
That explains the urgency. How many businesses are we actually talking about here?
According to WJCT, which is Jacksonville Public Media via NPR, and CBP's own operational guidance, over 56,000 U.S. importers have already registered to use the system. The total debt estimates range from $166 billion to $170 billion. But tomorrow's launch is just Phase 1, which focuses on approximately $127 billion. That's roughly 76 to 82% of the total pool, and it represents the portion that's electronically ready for refund.
Why not release all of it at once?
CBP is terrified of a total system collapse, frankly, so Phase 1 is restricted to what they're calling lower complexity claims. That means unliquidated entries, which are shipments where the final duty hasn't been officially finalized by CBP. It also includes liquidated entries, but only if they were finalized within the last 80 days. CBP chose that 80-day window deliberately to build in a 10-day buffer before the legal 90-day deadline for voluntary reliquidation expires.
Are there technical hoops importers have to jump through to file tomorrow?
Quite a few, actually. Importers and brokers need an active account on the Automated Commercial Environment Secure Data Portal, also called the ACE Secure Data Portal. With the importer's sub-account specifically enabled, CBS News flagged one really important detail that could trip people up. Refunds will only be issued through the Automated Clearinghouse, or ACH. The bank details companies use to pay duties aren't automatically used for refunds, so importers have to have manually updated their ACH refund information. And all filing has to be done through a specific CSV file format, limited to 9,999 entry numbers per file.
That sounds like a recipe for some headaches on day one. Now, you mentioned Phase 1 covers about $127 billion. What's happening with the rest?
This is where it gets legally fascinating. Under standard customs law, tariff payments become final and conclusive if an importer doesn't file a formal protest within 180 days of liquidation. Time and several trade legal experts report that approximately $39 billion falls into this finally liquidated category. The government initially argued it could keep that money under the doctrine of administrative finality, essentially a technicality.
So the government was trying to hold on to $39 billion on a technicality?
They were, yes. But on March 27th of this year, Judge Richard Eaton of the U.S. Court of International Trade issued an order waiving that finality. His reasoning was pretty direct. The government has no right to retain funds collected under an unconstitutional law, period. The Department of Justice now has until early June 2026 to appeal that waiver. So that $39 billion is shaping up to be the high-stakes focal point of the next round of litigation.
Let's talk about the money itself. Where is the government getting $166 billion to pay people back?
That's the uncomfortable part. The $166 billion collected in 2025 wasn't held in escrow somewhere. It was deposited into the general fund and spent on ongoing government operations. It's already gone. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed the Treasury will use the judgment fund, which is codified at 31 U.S.C. Section 1304, to cover the refunds. It's a permanent, indefinite appropriation used to pay court judgments, so it doesn't require a new vote from Congress.
But that money still has to come from somewhere, right?
Absolutely. The Congressional Budget Office warns that this refund effectively adds $166 billion to the national deficit and requires new government borrowing. And it gets worse when you zoom out. The CBO estimates the total 10-year fiscal impact, including lost future revenue and interest, could reach $2 trillion. That's a staggering number that's going to hang over budget debates for years.
So importers get their money back. But what about regular consumers who paid higher prices all year?
This is the part of the story that's really frustrating for everyday shoppers. Refunds go only to the importer of record, which is the entity that technically paid the customs bill. ABC News and NPR have both highlighted this growing point of contention. Many retailers and suppliers pass tariff costs down to consumers through higher prices over the past year. Despite that, there are currently no federal mandates requiring corporations to pass these refunds back to the people who actually absorbed those costs at the register.
So companies could just pocket the refunds and keep prices where they are?
Legally, as of today, April 19th, yes. And that's exactly why we're seeing a wave of unjust enrichment, class action lawsuits. FedEx is facing cases, including Anastopolo versus FedEx and Reiser versus FedEx, which have been consolidated in Tennessee. FedEx is expected to present its major defense strategy by April 23rd, so just days from now. Costco is dealing with suits like Sockoff versus Costco, where plaintiffs argue that Costco's plan to provide future value through lower prices isn't sufficient for the specific members who paid inflated prices over the last year.
Are any other major retailers facing legal action?
Lululemon is one to watch closely. It's become something of a bellwether case for what lawyers are calling embedded price increases. The company is accused of raising general retail prices to offset tariffs, not just adding a visible surcharge. Some companies have signaled good faith. FedEx has indicated it may pass refunds to customers. Costco's CEO stated the company would return value through, quote, lower prices and transparency, end quote. But as of today, those remain voluntary corporate decisions, with no legal teeth behind them.
For the businesses that do file tomorrow, how long before they actually see money in their accounts?
CBP is anticipating a 60 to 90-day wait time for payouts once claims are submitted, and that's for the straightforward Phase 1 claims. For small to medium enterprises, these refunds, often totaling millions of dollars, are genuinely a lifeline after a year of trade war-driven inflation. But between the processing timeline, the looming DOJ appeal over administrative finality for that $39 billion, and the consumer lawsuits piling up, the full redistribution of this $166 billion is a process that will likely take years to fully conclude.
A massive undertaking by any measure. Chloe, thanks for walking us through all of that.
Happy to do it, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The House of Representatives decided to keep their eyes on the prize, or at least on the foreigners, by passing a 10-day extension of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It was a real wake-up call for the Capitol, passing by unanimous consent shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning on Friday. Lawmakers were spying a deadline of April 20th, but this move pushes the expiration date to April 30th to keep the conversation going. Speaker Mike Johnson found himself in a bit of a surveillance snag when 20 conservative holdouts and a group of Democrats blocked longer-term renewals favored by the administration. This stopgap provides a tiny window to look into privacy reforms, though some feel the lack of warrant requirements is simply unwarranted. It is a brief pause for a tool that allows the government to listen in on foreign targets, even if they occasionally pick up some incidental chatter from folks back home. Moving to the House next door, the House of Representatives delivered a protected punch by voting 224 to 204 to extend temporary protected status for Haitian immigrants. This rare bipartisan move gives about 330,000 to 350,000 nationals a reason to breathe easy through April 2029. Representatives Ayanna Pressley and Laura Gillen successfully discharged their duties by leading a petition that bypassed leadership, thanks to 11 Republican defectors who decided to help their neighbors. While the administration has tried to terminate the program, supporters in places like Springfield, Ohio, and Miami, Florida, say these workers are the heart of the nursing and manufacturing sectors. The bill now faces a mountain of a challenge in the Senate and a potential veto from the president, but for now, the status is quite literally protected. Across the pond, Bulgarians are heading to the polls today for the 8th time in 5 years, which is certainly one way to keep the electorate on their toes. This snap election follows the collapse of the Zhelyazkov government and mass protests over the budget and corruption. Former President Rumen Radev has resigned his ceremonial post to lead the Progressive Bulgaria coalition, and he is currently polling ahead of the pack at 34%. While he has been vocal about his opposition to the invasion of Ukraine, he is also campaigning on a platform of reopening dialogue with Russia, making many wonder which way the country will lean. After 5 years of political instability, voters are hoping this 8th attempt at a stable parliament will finally be the charm that sticks. In the Pacific, North Korea is making waves again after launching 5 short-range ballistic missiles from the coastal city of Sinpo. These projectiles traveled about 140 kilometers before splashing down in the East Sea. It seems Pyongyang wanted to give South Korean President Lee Jae-myung a bit of a parting gift just hours before he left for state visits to India and Vietnam. Intelligence officials are diving deep into whether these were fired from land or a submarine, as Sinpo is the North's primary shipyard. This 7th test of the year really rockets the regional tension, especially as the United Nations warns about the North's progress in diversifying its nuclear delivery systems, including those tricky cluster bomb warheads. Finally, Pope Leo XIV, the very first American-born pontiff, has touched down in Luanda, Angola. He is not just there for the sights. He is challenging leaders to break the cycle of interests and the logic of extractivism that has plundered the continent's resources. During a massive Sunday gathering in Calamba, the Pope urged the elite to prioritize the common good, proving he is a man of the people. While there has been some friction between the Vatican and the White House lately, the Pope dismissed those political narratives, focusing instead on a message of joy that he says can never be stolen. This visit marks the 3rd leg of his 11-day tour, highlighting his role as a moral compass for economic justice in the global South. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.